Once a year, there is a particularly special meal at my parents' house. Maybe you have a meal like I'll describe too. There's quite a lead up to ours. Preparation always starts days in advance, and family have been invited from all over the Puget Sound, and we all chip in. If you like to cook, much of the fun is simply in the joy of preparing the food itself anyway. We all work to make sure the table is decorated just right, the candles are lit, the bread is freshly baked, the wine is corked. And for this meal, most importantly, and I do apologize to my vegan and my vegetarian friends, you might want to plug your ears at this point of the sermon. The enormous prime rib would have been pulled from the smoky charcoal grill at precisely 117 degrees so that after it rested and was cut, it would be perfectly pink inside, and my Grandma Rose would have no cause to complain that we'd killed it twice. Right before we would sit down, those of us who would want to would go out on the back deck, and I would have sliced the ribs off, and we would stand back on the back deck and chew the salty, rich meat right off the bone and talk about how it was one of the best tastes of the whole year. But as good as the food was, the real joy was in being together with the loved ones. And I was reminded of my family's special meal when I read the meal this week that Jesus shared with his friends in Bethany. Prior to this dinner and his arrival back toward Jerusalem, Jesus had been avoiding attention and arrest out on the edge of the wilderness, not too far away. Coming into the home of his good friends after being on the run would have meant a place to clean up, to have a rich meal prepared for him, his hungry disciples, and to enjoy the welcome company and fellowship that they'd been missing. I can smell the fresh baked bread, feel the fellowship, and hear the sound of laughter that would have been just what they needed. And surely the time spent around that table that evening would have been a great balm to Jesus. As it is with that meal, he was beginning the last week before his death on the cross. Jesus will return to this house at the end of each day in his final week before his crucifixion. It may have been his favorite place to stay. It may have been his favorite family to be with. And a home for one who spent so much of his later years without a home, a safe place, while he followed a path to giving up his safety, to do something sacrificial, to do a new thing for God's people, as Isaiah refers to it. Like we remember Lent in this season that leads up to Easter, God's people are always remembering the Exodus story, leading to their salvation across the sea and into the promised land. And our Isaiah reading today recalls the deliverance through the waters. But it sets up another problem. As we know, there is wilderness ahead. And Isaiah is not just remembering the 40 years of the Exodus wilderness for God's people then, but is using that memory hundreds of years later as a metaphor for the Babylonian Empire that is moving in to destroy Jerusalem, the temple, and to carry off the people into exile. This will be a time in the wilderness that will see the end of many generations. Since Isaiah was written over a period of 200 years, we get to this 43rd chapter of Isaiah that we're in today, and it's already the part of the story where the people have been in exile for generations. And the wilderness has once again defined who they are. Feel familiar? They would begin asking themselves, as we do sometimes, has God forgotten us? As Isaiah's students have likely taken over his writing, carrying on with his prophetic vision, they now see that the Babylonian exile is going to end because the Persian Empire is coming in to defeat them. God's people will soon be able to return home to Jerusalem and rebuild. Isaiah writes that a new thing is about to happen, a way through the wilderness, a way back home that God will lead them on. And our Revised Common Lectionary pairs these stories today intentionally to show that Jesus is doing another new thing in saving the world for himself. A way through the wilderness, then and now, bringing people to a reconciled relationship with God, providing us a fresh start each time we need for following. Moving from the wilderness of the Isaiah story back to the wilderness in the gospel story, we pick back up with the meal. In true Martha fashion, she's prepared and served a rich meal that all have eaten and loved. Lazarus, who Jesus has recently raised from the dead, sits among the friends. Conversation may have included details and remembrances of Lazarus' raising or Jesus and his friends being on the run because of it. Just a handful of days prior to this, the sisters would have been covering their dead brother's body in oil and aromatics as they prepared him in the traditional way for burial. But now life pulses through him as they eat and drink together. His other sister, Mary, is in her familiar place as well. But instead of sitting at Jesus' feet, listening and learning, she is close enough to them to use her hair to wipe them after she has put oil and aromatics on Jesus' feet. It's easy to assume John is telling us that Mary is the only one who knows what's going on. If this Jesus really is the Messiah, won't he use God's power to save them in a mighty victory? His disciples are probably still thinking. But Mary knows Jesus is preparing for something different, something new. And she rubs the expensive nard into his feet as an extravagant act of devotion, gratitude, and worship. And Jesus knows it's in preparation for his burial. Why does she do this? Because even through the fear and the confusion that awaits them outside the door of this house in Bethany, Mary's heart is surely fixed where true joys are to be found. Mary knows what Paul would find out later about the surpassing value of knowing Jesus Christ. Somehow Mary knows two things. She knows Jesus' time is short, and she knows that Jesus is the source of a joy that is not fleeting or hollow, but perfect in love. And even though he walks to his own death, her hope is in him. As God has made a way for people in the past, and as Jesus is now doing a new thing to make a way for God's people, Mary shows us in this story where our hearts should be as we make the journey through the wildernesses that we are in. And we use Lenten wilderness to prepare ourselves for Easter. We travel through Lent to confess our sin, known and unknown, things done, things left undone, things that have been done on our behalf. We reflect, repent, we come clean before the celebration of Jesus' resurrection. And if we just want to skip all that Lent is and quickly get to Easter, all we want's cheap grace. We can choose to live our lives without inviting Jesus in. We can forget God when it seems like God is quiet compared to the chaos around us. With Jesus, there's always a dual invitation. He invites us to the meal. Richer than my family's, much more important, and we invite him into our lives daily. The food is Jesus' real presence, and it keeps us encouraged in the wilderness. We cannot get to Easter without going through Lent. And as Jesus has turned toward Jerusalem and his inevitable death, we also turn with him toward Easter and resurrection. The countdown to true joy has begun.